right, we will begin. For those, if there's anybody I don't know, I'm John Shine. Kevin is not able to be with us this morning. So last week, if you were here, I wasn't able to be here, and so the high schoolers had to come in here and listen to whatever Kevin and you guys have been talking about related to Calvin and the Institutes. This week, you have to pay us back by joining us for our final class on Biblical Worldviews that we've been talking about for almost 6 months now, 5 months since January. So what we're going to be doing this morning is giving you a taste of what we have been talking about over the last several months related to worldviews and the different ways that what worldviews are and the different ways that people filter information and think about their world. I asked those who have been in the class to sit up here, and they've got a microphone so that they can serve as my experts on some of these different worldviews and help us understand some of what they are as we do a brief overview again of what we've been talking about over the last 5 months or so and kind of wrap up this class, both classes really, as we prepare to go into our summer session. So let me open us with a quick word of prayer. Father, what a beautiful morning you have given us to be together in your house. Thank you for this Sunday morning to worship you and to learn from each other and from your word. I pray that you would guide our conversation and that you would speak truth to each one of our hearts this morning. Amen. So, and some of you may also remember back in December, I did sort of a preview of what this series was going to be about with the adults. So the first couple of questions, you're not off the hook, and you can't just leave it to the smart guys up here to answer for us. So, what do we mean when we're talking about worldviews? What is a worldview? What does it mean? What difference does it make? And there's a hint in the slide. I don't usually give hints that easy.
The lens from which people view things happening around them.
Okay, a lens through which we view everything around us. That's the hint from the slide. So our worldview, everybody has some worldview. You may not think about it very much. Many people don't necessarily think about it, although I think everyone does, at least implicitly from time to time. It's the frame that we use, the lens that we use to filter all the world around us. So if my worldview is accurate, then it's like putting on a pair of glasses, the difference between putting on a pair of glasses versus taking them off. I either am seeing things, the world around me, the things that are happening to me, my own life clearly, or I'm seeing them in a very fuzzy and inaccurate way. So, why does it particularly matter that I see things clearly in an inaccurate way? Why should I care about my worldview or the worldviews of others around me? They told me coming in with the adults was where people would start to answer more. I thought it was the high schoolers that were silent.
The world will prescribe for you a bad pair of glasses.
The world will prescribe for you a bad pair of glasses. That makes sense to me. And I think that's biblical, that the world will prescribe for you a bad pair of glasses. Agree? You have to, because I'm the teacher. So we've got a couple of verses that we have gone to a number of times that have served as kind of a touchstone for us as we've been going through this class to think about why do we pay attention to worldviews? Why is it important for us as believers to do? If you would turn to Romans chapter 12. So not to sound like Deckard, but these are some of my top 10 favorite verses in the Bible. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. tell us this. I asked you to turn to it, and then I cheated and put it on the slide anyway. So Paul in Romans is challenging us to think about how we think. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world. That's Bruce's bad prescription. Paul was telling us, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So what is Paul calling us, challenging us, commanding us to do here? So what is Paul telling us to do?
He's calling us to constantly change our prescription and have it more in line with how God created the world, how He views the world.
Yeah.
So we're, as we grow in our walk with the Lord and grow in discernment and knowing Him more, that prescription will change and become more perfected.
Yeah, he's calling us to think differently, to be transformed, renewing our mind, growing in discernment as we walk with him, as we spend time in his word, as we focus on the truth, and not to be conformed to just whatever the world throws at us, whatever the world tells us about how we should think. Because the world will, back to Bruce's point, the world will tell us to think differently and in ways that are wrong. So this one I didn't cheat and put up on the slide. Turn back over to Romans chapter 1 with me, please. This is another set of verses that we've turned to a number of times throughout the last few months. Because Paul is telling us something here about the world. And so starting in verse 21, he's been talking about non-believers and how he says just before this that what can be known about God is plain about his divine qualities, the fact that he's God. And then he says, for although they, non-believers, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth of God. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So what is Paul telling us about the world? Back to, if you think back again to chapter 12, do not be conformed to this world. Why? What is the world? How does the world think according to Paul? They suppress the truth. So the truth is there. There's some truth that everybody knows, and they actively suppress it. It's a good Presbyterian answer for us.
Self-serving.
Self-serving how?
Because it talks about where the creatures are worshiping themselves.
Yeah. Worshipping themselves, worshipping the creation rather than the Creator. And they're fools. They're trying to be wise, but it says their foolish hearts were darkened. And how does God respond here? So we know ultimately God responds by sending his Son to die on a cross for our salvation. But here, how does it say God responds to this suppressing the truth? Yeah. It says, therefore, in 24, therefore God gave them up. So there is a point at which, there's an extent to which God allows people who are going to suppress the truth to continue down this foolish path. And it's important for us, it's important for us to understand that that happens and to pay attention to how it happens in the people around us. Is it? Is it important for us to understand other worldviews, or should we just focus on a biblical worldview? Obviously, I think we should, because that's what I've been doing for the last few months with our young adults, but that doesn't mean I'm right.
I say yes. It just helps you communicate with them when you understand where they're coming from. And also, I think it gives us a little empathy that they're so lost. It's not just a complete, I don't know, it helps to understand where they're coming from to find common ground and then share the gospel that way.
Yeah, so it has a significant impact on our ability to evangelize, to connect with non-believers. We shouldn't be reading Romans, as with any other part of the Scripture, if we come away feeling proud of ourselves that we're wise and everybody else is dumb, then we're reading it wrong. It should give us a humility, a sense of humility and empathy for others whose lens is out of focus. And to the extent I think that we can understand the ways they're out of focus, we can communicate truth better and challenge our own thinking, renew our mind, and be transformed. So what are the things, what difference does it make? So I've suggested that our worldview is a lens, that it helps us filter information, it helps us think about the world, it helps us, I haven't said this, but it helps us answer the biggest questions of life. A lot of the people, so in the books that I've been reading about worldviews, that's kind of the answer a lot of people come back to. It's the way, it helps you think about how to answer life's biggest questions. So what are life's big questions that we all have to answer for ourselves? Some of them.
What's my purpose?
What is my purpose in life? Why am I here?
And generally good or bad?
Okay? Yes. Good. Is man generally good or bad? And I would say even before that, what is good or bad? What's good or bad? How do you define it? How do you know? Other big questions.
What will happen after I die?
What happens to me when I die? Why am I here? What happens to me when I die? How do I know what's good and bad? Is there a God, and what is he like? Then as I'm thinking through how to answer those big questions, what are the important things that our worldview then shapes? If it's a lens that shapes how I think about things, what sorts of things does it shape? One of them, I would suggest, is it shapes, our worldview helps us think about truth. So you remember Pontius Pilate, when Christ is before him, Christ talks about truth, and Pontius Pilate responds. You remember how he responds? He says, what is truth? The implication being for Pontius Pilate, and lots of Romans in his day, and Greeks in his day, what is truth? You can't know what truth is. Our worldview helps us think about that. So part of many worldviews is this idea that you can't really know what's true or false. So if you can't really know what truth is, there's no real objective basis for determining what truth is, then there's lots of things that flow from that. What else? What other things are important? Our faith, okay.
We lose sight of the Lord in thinking of the way the world is going. We sort of follow their pattern instead of what God tells us.
Sure, absolutely. Other things. What difference does it make? What are the things that it shapes? Clyde?
Our lifestyle.
Our lifestyle,
how we should live, Frank and Traeger, how we should live. Or how should a Christian live? Should I say, not we, them, us?
yep. Well, I mean, I think that's true whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. Our worldview does, I mean, it gets to this idea of what's good or not. How should I live? If I have a worldview that's not Christian, I also use that to inform how I should live. I mean, that's a major part of this, that it tells me what my most important values ought to be as I'm making life decisions. What else?
What is value? What is your value?
So,
Beliefs.
okay, so like my worth value, do you mean, or values like
More
morality?
morality.
Okay. Absolutely. A major part of a lot of the disagreement between different worldviews. Anything else that seems like?
That is what constitutes justice.
Justice, for sure. So justice, is it important? Is it something we should worry about? And what does it mean?
I'd say what we consume, both food, doing things, what we consume.
Okay? So we decide, so what we consume, whether it's food, whether it's media, whether it's books that I'm reading, that's media too, sorry.
Duty to others.
Okay, duty to others, I think, is significant, yeah.
Family, right? Do I get married? Do I have children? How I raise my children? Things that we could put back forward.
Yeah, so lots of questions around sort of practical issues of how I live my life in relationship with other people. So marriage and family, but even more broadly to relationships. Decker.
Eternity.
So we said one of these big questions is what happens to me when I die? How do I think about eternity? And let me say, eternity, there's a better way to say this, I'm sure, but versus the present. So in some of the videos that we've been watching as we've gone through the class by R.C. Sproul, R.C. talks about he had a ministry, and his tagline for his ministry was, "Right now counts forever." That's not common to every worldview. There are worldviews that say explicitly, no, that's wrong. We don't live on, Edward's not here so I can get away with this. We don't live on a line of time that goes eternally one way or another. Our life on earth is a dot, but right now, what we do right now counts forever along the line. That's what we would say. But there are worldviews that say no, right now counts only for right now.
What constitutes life?
Are you thinking about the abortion issue particularly? Okay. So what is life? Certainly, abortion is one of many political issues. So I'll leave that up there. One that we spent some time talking about was government as well. So why do you have a government? Why do you need a government? Do you need a government? Is it good? Is it bad? What is it good for? What are the limits of government and government's authority? So we could think of others, but these are some of the kinds of things that we've been talking about in our class as we look at different particular worldviews that have developed over time in contrast to biblical truth that we understand. So I have truth at the top because how does our worldview as believers, as Christians, what does our worldview tell us about truth? Is there such a thing as truth? Yes. Sorry, you don't get to answer the easy questions. Those are for me. How do we know? How do we discover it? Because there are worldviews, there are philosophies that say, so you've heard probably, I think, therefore I am. And it just slipped my mind what famous old dead person said that. But the idea was, who was it? Descartes, thank you. I think, therefore I am. The idea is, I can't really know anything. I can't even know that I exist. And so he's trying to logic his way through this because we know that our senses can fool us. We know that we could all be in a big matrix simulation. But then he comes to, well, but the fact that I'm thinking about this means that I exist. And so that's kind of the only thing I can really know. We would say, no, there's more stuff that we can know that's true. How? What does a biblical worldview tell us about how we can know what's true? Is that what you were going to say? Yeah. Our worldview says we can know, there is truth, and we can know it because it's here. That there is a basis for truth, there's a way to know for sure what is true, and it's because God has revealed it to us in His Word. He's also revealed it to us in some other ways, but we can be sure, if it's in here, that it is true. And that's the basis. How do we know, back to values and morality, how do we know what is good? Or to the idea of, how do I live, good or bad? How do I know what is good? You're not allowed to say Bible. We already used that answer. Okay, you can say Bible if you want.
It's written on your heart.
So I know what is good because it's written on my heart.
People have never read the Bible. No. There's good and bad things.
Okay, so there's certainly a worldview that says if I feel it in my heart, then it's good. Is that what we would say? No, I'm twisting your words intentionally. So we would say that God has given us a conscience. How do we know that God's given us a conscience and written good and bad on our hearts? Because this one you're allowed to keep saying Bible. Sorry, I shouldn't have banned that answer. That's a reasonable answer. So we can know the truth because God's revealed it to us. We know what's good and bad because good is who God is. God's revealed to us who He is, and He has said, I'm good. He's the definition of good. So values, morality, how I should live is I should be like God. And the opposite of that, how I should not live, bad is the things that God hates. So, we have talked in our class about a bunch of different competitors. And most of these end in the words ism. So one of the things that as we've examined some of these ideas, is a lot of them on their own, some of the ideas themselves are not bad. The idea of justice, to take your example, is not bad and is one we would agree with and is one the Lord confirms over and over again in the Bible that God is a God of justice. He cares about justice. But when we turn it into an ism, when we make our whole worldview, our whole lens about justice, then we tend to get off track. So a lot of these isms have a big idea associated with them. That big idea in itself, in some cases, is not necessarily bad. But when it becomes your whole worldview, your whole lens through which all truth and life becomes, is filtered, then it gives us problems and tends to run us down this road of foolish thinking. So now here's where we rely on our experts. So give me one of the isms, one of the worldviews that we talked about that you remember, and give me sort of an idea of what it's about. You gotta use the microphone so everybody can hear you now.
Existentialism.
Existentialism. We do big words over in our room. I mean, I know y'all are doing Calvin, but. All right, so give me a sort of top line. What is existentialism all about? What does it tell us?
Basically, like, the strongest survive, and strength is like the epitome of
Okay.
existence, because all we know is that we exist.
Yeah. So existentialism, we have this existence in it. So the idea is, sorry, let me look back through my other slides. Do I have one for existentialism? No, sorry. So the idea is, as Owen said, back to this, I think, therefore I am. The only thing I can really know that's true is that I exist. And it's sort of the only thing that matters. So you can't know any other truth beyond that. Therefore, what did you say the therefore was?
Like, the strongest survive.
Yeah. So the idea of, any names come to your mind when we say existentialism? Big sort of old dead guy names? So there's kind of different strands. Kierkegaard is one of the kind of early fathers of what you might call he believes there's a God, but essentially believes there is a God, but we can't know anything about him, so it doesn't really matter. The big name with existentialism is Nietzsche. You hear of Nietzscheism, Nietzsche, other people say. I don't know how you say it. So do we know anything about Nietzsche or Nietzscheism? We know the Nazis liked him. So the idea with existentialism is the only thing there is, the only thing that matters is that I exist right now in this place. Nothing else matters. If it does, we can't know anyway. There's no way to really know. And so you get to this, from that, you get to this idea of strength. So how do you live in light of that basic fact? The way you live is to stare down that abyss of despair that says nothing matters, I have no purpose, the only thing that is important is right now. You accept that truth and live how you want to. Take control. So the existentialist heroes are people like Napoleon Bonaparte, because he takes control. He doesn't worry about dumb stuff like how we should live and good or bad and right and wrong. He says, I'm in charge and I'm taking control of whatever I want. And the Nazis and Adolf Hitler apply this then to racial theory and things and say we need a race of supermen, Ubermensch, who understand this. They don't worry about all this namby-pamby religion stuff. They don't worry about what happens to us after they die because it doesn't matter. What matters is being strong enough right now to accept the fact that nothing matters. There are a lot of suicides that come out of existential ideas today. Once you accept, the idea is accept this idea that nothing matters. Once you do that, it's very hard to be hopeful about much of anything. But that's what the existentialists sort of prize, like, is accepting that and living in light of it anyway. All right, what else did we talk about? Owen got his check mark.
Relativism.
Relativism. All right, what's the big idea of relativism? We also called that pluralism.
Basically, there is no objective truth. You mentioned earlier, twisting Mr. Fromm's words, that there's a worldview that says that whatever we feel is good. That's relativism. If you think something is good or you think something is bad, then that makes it good or bad for you. So the idea that marriage is good and necessary is equally as valid as the idea that marriage is unnecessary. Just because, since there is no objective truth, we have to operate based on whatever we feel like.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. See, they pay good attention. So The idea of pluralism or relativism as an ism. So we are Americans. Our denomination in our pocket says e pluribus unum, out of many one. We like pluralism as an idea that, as a political philosophy that says everybody gets a voice, everybody gets a view, free speech, you get to express what you want, what you think. As a worldview, it's exactly as Chase described. The idea as a worldview is, again, there is no truth, objectively absolute truth. All ideas are valid. So the distinction is, politically as Americans, we believe all ideas, you have a right to have them and express them. As a worldview, it says, no, it's not just that you can express them, they're all equally valid. So whatever you believe is just as valid as what I believe, there's no way to judge between them. Make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense. All right, what's another one? You don't have to answer.
One was spiritualism.
Spiritualism we spent some time talking about. You mentioned Buddhism back in December when we talked about this, and I kind of expanded from that. So what are our takeaways from spiritualism?
A lot of it was like the universe is in charge, and so everything happens for a reason because the universe knows what it's doing, so you should pray to it, and that we all have good energy, so we should send it to others.
Yeah.
By way of crystals.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry to the parents in the room. We looked at some weird stuff sometimes. Spiritualism, very common in our world today, at least in America. You have I think of it as, again, somewhat of a continuum from, on the one side, you have like the Wicca faith, like modern witches and wizards, over to people who would just say, I'm a very spiritual person. I'm really spiritual. And then in the middle, in my mind, you kind of have transcendentalism, however you spell it, Emerson and Thoreau and those kind of more thinkers who are writing poetry and talking about a connection between different things in the world. That's a lot of what seems to tie spiritualism together is we sense that we have some connection to other people and to this created world. We want to tap into that in some way, this connection. But gosh, it's so hard to figure out where the truth lies. And so we try and tap into different ways of controlling our universe. A lot of these get to control. So my worldview is about, I'm spiritual, I feel stuff deeply, and I want to exert some control. There's a shooting, a horrible massacre of children in Texas, and that makes me feel bad, and I want to exert some control, and I want to make other people feel good, so what can I do about it? I can send energy into the universe, positive energy. And I send my positive energy into the universe. We listened to a little bit of this YouTube video, a morning prayer to the universe. It's not something I'm suggesting, because it was weird, right? In many ways, if you just replaced universe with God, much of it was a prayer that we would pray to an actual person, God. The idea of this is there's this sort of impersonal connection between us. And then as you go down into this, you can send energy specifically to other people, and if you use particular crystals, then that makes it more powerful. There's a lot of talk about spiritual awakenings and embracing your spiritual awakening, and it's weird.
Do you have to have a vision board to subscribe to that?
You don't have to have a vision board, but boy, does it help. All right, any others that you guys remember? Ma'am.
Would it be people that would think when they go to church that they are spiritual?
Ooh.
That,
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
It's not a real connection of knowing the Lord.
Yeah.
It's just a formality that they do.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we specifically haven't been talking about kind of other faiths and things. We may do that in the future. And that's almost an in-between of, I come to church, I'm not sure about all this stuff, but I want to come to church because I'm very spiritual. I think you would say that. Yeah, and certainly we would say there are churches and denominations that are basically this. Of kind of, there's not necessarily a personal God, and if there is, there's no way to know what's true or not true. But it's important to connect with other people, and there are ways that we can influence the world around us by thinking positively. I'll buy that. Kara?
Another one that we talked about was humanism.
Humanism. So again, human, we're pro, we like them. When we make it an ism, we can have some problems. What's humanism all about?
Well, humanism was one that a lot of what they said was closer to what we believe than a lot of the other ones we looked at, but it was missing a lot of what we believe. So one way that we thought about it was that humanism in some ways takes biblical ethics and removes the Christian foundation from it. So basically their idea is that the goal is the greater good of humanity. And I think on their website maybe, their little tagline was good without a God. So,
they're smart, right?
There were things, of course, that we disagreed with, more than just things that they left out. They believe that objective truth exists, but that it can change over time. They think that people are basically good and that history is going in a positive direction, and that there's no reward or punishment for what we do after death. But they do believe that people have inherent worth, and that in just day-to-day how we should treat people, we would agree with them in a lot of it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so Kara nailed it. The idea of humanism, as she said at the beginning, I don't want to reject the idea of any objective goodness or badness. I think it's really important to be kind to other people, and I think kindness is a virtue, a value that matters. But the measure of a man, the measure of men, is mankind. So the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose for each one of us is to advance humanity. So there's a lot, as Kara said, that we would agree with about treating other people well. They'd be all on board for the golden rule. But ultimately, there's kind of no purpose to it. And ultimately, if we really have a disagreement between Bruce and I about what constitutes good, about what constitutes being a good human to other humans, there's really no way to adjudicate between us, except that he's better looking, so what do you do? So you can see we've got some humanist award winners there from the American Humanist Association. Kurt Vonnegut talks about, as Kara said again, this idea of it's important for me to be good, but it has nothing to do with what happens after I die. So, any others that you guys remember? Owen?
Hedonism.
Hedonism. It's the fun one, right? All right, what's hedonism all about?
Really pleasure and feeling good.
Yeah, the
There-
big idea of
yeah.
hedonism is pursue pleasure and avoid pain. So you have, we talked about some different strands. The kind of, I think what most of us think of when we think of hedonism is on the left-hand side there. Sorry, the picture's hard to see, but some of it you don't need to see. Bacchanalianism of just sort of wild parties all the time. Hedonism, as it develops, then you get to the Stoics, which is not pursuing maximum pleasure all the time. The problem that hedonists have is if you focus on wild parties all the time, what happens the next morning? Then you wake up with headaches and regret and whatever else, so if you have a good time getting high the night before, you wake up the next day and you have pain. Well, if the whole point is pursue pleasure and avoid pain, now you haven't helped yourself because you've pursued pleasure to the point that it induces pain. So the Stoic says, no, the best thing is to just be cool, man. Just accept things happen and it's all okay. And so I'm not trying to seek high highs or low lows. I'm trying to seek this just sort of calmness. And then the Epicureans focus on what they would call sort of the higher pleasures. And so focus on the good things in life, high culture, literature, good food and drink. They would emphasize friendship. So a really strong best friend relationship is sort of the highest good for an Epicurean because tends not to be very painful, doesn't have the super highs and lows that a romantic relationship frequently entails. So hedonism, pursue pleasure, avoid pain. We probably don't need to say a lot more about that one. It's bad. Any others that you guys remember? Any others that we should have talked about from the crowd?
Overarching category of materialism.
Materialism. Yeah, we didn't talk about that as a particular category. I feel like it falls under a lot of these, but absolutely. The idea of whoever dies with the most stuff wins. Stuff is all there is. Pursuing stuff and having the most stuff is the definition of good. And the way I treat you and the way I interact with you relates to getting the most stuff. Or maybe, on a more humanist side, the two of us together ultimately kind of collecting the most stuff.
It might be a subset of existentialism, but nihilism?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we would put that, and we talked a little bit about it under existentialism. Nihilism is almost the most extreme in my but the most honest, actually, I think. I mean, we came back to existentialism a lot because in a lot of ways, intellectually, it's the most honest of all these, resulting in despair. Let's see. We talked about positivism. Anybody know what positivism is as an ism? Again, positive, we're cool with being positive. That's actually not really what it's about. So positivism is the idea that, back to this idea of what's true and what you can know, the only things you can really know are things that you can prove scientifically. So if I can do a scientific experiment where I can observe and measure something, and then I can do that same experiment over again and observe and measure it again, and I get the same results, then I can be positive that it's true. Anything that I can't prove that way, anything that I can't either prove through scientific experiment or through logical deduction, I reject as untrue. Why is that an issue for us as believers? We like things that are true that we can prove. Because we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes? So, if my faith tells me something that conflicts with what I can produce in a scientific experiment, then I believe what the Bible tells me. I believe that is true. We talked about Are we down to the exciting stuff already? So we talked about, I used a number of terms for this, and I think it's easiest to talk about it in kind of two different strands. So we talked about what we variously called social justice, or wokeness, being woke. Obviously very current in our culture right now. We found it most helpful to think about it in kind of two different strands. And so in the first, which I think is the older kind of the two strands, at least in terms of being current in America, is anti-racism. So again, the challenge is when we become an ism. So racism, 100% bad. We can all agree on that. Good. Being anti-racist, opposing racism, absolutely in line with biblical truth, in line with our doctrine. No issues there. What is the problem when being opposed to racism, in a desire for people not to be mistreated because of their race? What's the problem when it becomes a worldview, when it becomes my ism that I live for? Kara?
Well, one of the problems is that it focuses just on that. Like, one of the things that we had said when we were talking about it is, in comparing it to Christianity, is Christianity says the greatest problem is sin, just generally. Anti-racism says the greatest problem is racism. And Christianity says the solution is Jesus, but anti-racism says the solution is social justice. Yeah. So it's really just focused in on that one thing too much, ignoring everything else.
Yeah. And looking for it where it's not. So in the sense, I would agree in the sense that that we make racism and power, the relative power dynamics, social power dynamics, we make that, again, the lens by which we see everything that happens. And so we have to filter every interaction, every phenomena that we see through the lens of who's more powerful than someone else and how does that impact this relationship. So in our classroom, because I'm the teacher, I have absolute power within the classroom, and because they're the students, they have to sit down and be quiet and listen to what I say. And therefore, when we interact with each other, there's this power dynamic, this relative power dynamic, and we should question what I say because I'm the powerful one, and I've got some self-interested motives that are causing me to want to dominate this fine group of young Americans who now all think like me because I told them to. So, again, racism clearly bad, justice clearly good, and God is a God of justice, but when we make it our worldview through which we see every phenomenon and every interaction, then we start to move away from biblical truth. And then, I don't know if I need any more slides or not, but just in case. So we talked about these ideas, because these are words, terms that are important to the social justice movement and important to kind of understand how they're used. And again, not that the terms themselves are bad or that we would necessarily disagree with them. So on the upper left-hand side, you have a situation of inequality. Because the tree is bent towards the kid on the right, that kid gets more apples than the kid on the left through no fault or merit. It's just the way it is. Things are unequal. So if we want to create equality, we give both kids an equal size ladder. So we've made a situation where both are treated exactly equal. They get the same size ladder. But we haven't fixed the problem in the upper left corner. They both have the same size ladder, but still, because the tree is bent, the kid on the right is able to get more apples than the kid on the left. So then in the bottom left, we move to the idea of justice. So justice says, no, it's not just about treating both kids equally, giving them the same size ladder. We need to actually try and adjust the tree. And so we put supports on the tree, we put guy wires on the tree to try and bend the tree back so that we have a situation of justice where the tree itself becomes straight, and both kids, no matter what size ladders we give them, have a just opportunity. And then in the lower right, the idea of equity says, hey, if we just give each kid the same size ladder, they don't have the same outcomes, they don't have the same opportunities, so we need to give the one that the tree is bent away from a larger ladder. So these ideas come into the social justice movement, and again, none of them are wrong in and of themselves, are necessarily ones we would disagree with, until we make it a worldview that the problems in the world are because of bent trees, and the solutions are the right size ladders. So to my mind, doesn't make necessarily a lot of logical sense, but what in our society has gotten tied to then this social justice from the idea of anti-racism is the whole issue of sexuality, gender, and we get to LGBTQ+. So the social justice movement that, depending on, at least the way I kind of read it, starts out focused on anti-racism and trying to address real problems related to race, gets connected to the what is now the LGBTQ issue. And do you guys remember, what is it that's significant about this as a worldview? So you have similar challenges with anti-racism. You see everything through this prism, this lens of oppression of people based on their sexuality or their gender. Very briefly, so sexuality, we're talking about who you're attracted to. Gender, we're talking about whether you're male or female, or under this worldview, you could be anywhere in between, or none of the above. So what's the challenge? Do you remember? Sorry, that's an unfair question and mean of me. So what happens when we move particularly down here is that you start having this focus on identity. And so one of the things we could have listed that we didn't on our list of what does a worldview particularly impact, it impacts our identity, our understanding of what makes me me, what makes you you, and again back to then, who am I, what's my purpose, where do I go when I die? With the social justice movement focus on sexuality and gender, and to some extent anti-racism as well, we start to focus on particular aspects of my identity, and we say my identity consists of how I feel. So my identity with respect to sexuality is about how I feel about other people romantically. My identity with respect to gender is about how I feel related to things that we might consider masculine or feminine, or how I want to dress today. And that becomes, as an ism, as a worldview, that becomes the definition of truth. So truth, under this worldview, is about how I feel. And if truth is how I feel, and how I feel may change day to day, but how I feel today, if that's what's true and that's what's good, then the ultimate goodness in this worldview is what? How do I live a life that's really, really good? Just say it loud.
By being authentic.
Yeah. So it comes down to authenticity. So the worldview is about being authentically me. How do I know what's authentically me? It's what I feel like today. Which is, of course, what the Bible tells us, right? No, clearly not. So the challenge of the social justice movement is this focus on identity and authenticity, being true to you. You hear this all the time, that the highest value is being true to myself. I'm being true to me. And if some other person makes me feel bad or makes me reluctant to be authentically me, however I define that for myself, then that is the definition of bad, of injustice, of being evil to one another. Does that make, again, intellectually make sense? So, having spent a lot of time in the mire, as it were, where does that leave us? Let's close with another word of Scripture to encourage us that none of this, clearly, is a surprise to God, and He has the answers for us. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians, if you would, as we close. 1 Corinthians chapter 1.
It's not really a surprise to God, because there's nothing new on that board. People right now, they've just discovered it's wonderful.
It's a great point.
But God has seen it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
We keep reinventing the same thing.
Yeah, Barbara was saying, if you couldn't hear, she was saying, none of it is a surprise to God because none of it's new to God. We keep thinking we've come up with the new truth. That's back to Kara's point about humanism. A lot of humanism is about human knowledge will develop over time and will continue to progress. We are progressing as humans, progressivism. God's seen it all before. Back to the garden. It's all sadness, certainly. 1 Corinthians 1, starting in verse 18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, he's quoting Isaiah now, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? That's all of these. The wise, the debaters of this age. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom. The world didn't know God through logicking out the right worldview. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Thanks be to God. Amen. Thank you.